Hello, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine, Content Specialist for the Florida Joint Center for Citizenship, which is part of the School of Politics, Security, and International Affairs at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Welcome to our Middle School Civics Highlights series. Today we focus our attention on benchmark CG.3.7, explain the structure, functions, and processes of the legislative branch of government. In Part 2, we compare lawmakers and lawmaking at the local, state, and national levels. We focus our attention on Benchmark Clarification 2, where we compare local, state, and national lawmakers, and Benchmark Clarification 3, where we compare and contrast the lawmaking process at the local, state, and national levels. What are the different lawmaking positions at these three levels of government? And what are the different lawmaking processes at these three levels of government? Federal lawmakers have various powers and various terms. In the U.S. House of Representatives, each state is guaranteed at least one representative, more based on populations, and they serve two-year terms. There are 435 members of the U.S. House of Representatives. What this means is that every 10 years when the census is conducted, that every state, regardless of size, is guaranteed one seat, even if within the state boundaries there are not enough people living in that state to be considered a full district. But we respect the states. And we respect state boundaries when it comes to the House of Representatives. Each state also, regardless of size, is allotted 2 U.S. senators, and senators serve 6-year terms in the U.S. Senate. There are 100 members of the U.S. Senate. However, should some other state become a state, should a state be divided, for example, or should a current U.S. territory become a state such as Puerto Rico, or should Florida become 2 states, then the size of the Senate will grow. However, if the size of the House is going to grow, that's going to be if Congress decides to change its size by adding seats. Together, U.S. representatives and U.S. senators make up the Congress as a whole. We call this a bicameral or 2-house legislature, and there are no term limits for Congress members. Article 1, Section 7 of the U.S. Constitution focuses on federal lawmaking. Article 1, Section 7 says, "Every bill which shall have passed the House of Representatives and the Senate," so that means that at least 50% of the House of Representatives and at least 50% of the U.S. Senate, if they agree, then that bill is considered to have been passed. And if the bill is considered to be passed, then it is presented to the President of the United States. Sometimes you may hear the phrase presentments clause. The presentments clause is the requirement that all bills that are passed in Congress must be presented to the President. Or you might think of it as Congress giving the President a present. One way or the other, in order for a bill to become a law, the President must be presented with it. If the President approves of the bill, the President shall sign it. If not, the President shall return it. Then we look at what happens if the President vetoes legislation, which we'll be looking at shortly. If after reconsideration, so a bill is vetoed, and Congress says, we really should reconsider whether or not we feel strongly about this bill being passed, then the requirement is 2/3 of that House shall agree to pass the bill. So at least 50% pass the bill, but if that 50% passes the bill, it's presented to the President, the President rejects it, then at least 2/3 of each House of Congress must vote to override. Because in essence, what Congress is voting to do is to force the president to enforce a law that the president has rejected. So it's got to be a strong commitment from Congress to impose on the president in that way. So that's the override process, 2/3 of each house, then that bill becomes law. Looking back to President Washington, only 7% of all bills that have been vetoed have been overridden, which means that 93% of the time that if the president vetoes a bill, that veto will stick. Now let's look at state and local lawmakers. In the state of Florida, there are 80 House of Representatives districts and there are 40 Senate districts. So you can see that at the state level, there is a bicameral legislature. In the House of Representatives, members of the House are limited to 4 two-year terms, and members of the Senate are limited to 2 four-year terms. So that means that whether serving in the Senate or serving in the House, a person is limited to 8 years. But in order to secure the 8 years in the Senate, a person needs to run twice, once for the first 4-year term, once for the second 4-year term. But to get those same 8 years in the House, the person has to run 4 times because the term is a 2-year term. At the local level, whether we're focusing on cities, towns, or villages, city commissioners make up the city council, so there's a local legislative council, and at the county level, county commissioners make up the county commission. Now, focusing on state and local lawmaking, let's look at the Florida House and Senate, who, along with the governor, follow the same procedure as the U.S. Congress and President. Both houses must pass the bill and the governor must sign the bill. Or if the governor chooses to take no action and there is a certain number of days left in the session, then taking no action also might mean passage of the bill. So we see a lot of parallels here between what happens at the national level and what happens at the state level. At the local level, the same general principle applies across local governments. Local legislatures, whether they be city council or county commission, pass local laws, which are called ordinances. Some local lawmaking processes include a chief executive, such as a mayor, who may have the power to veto ordinances. Thank you for joining me for Middle School Civics Highlights. Do you still have questions? If so, please contact us using the information that appears on the screen. Till next time, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine. Thank you for joining me.